Welcome back to the Constitutional Clarion. Australians woke up this morning, my time, to discover that the highest Australian honour had been given to the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. This has resurrected some public anger about the secret ministries saga. For those of you watching from overseas with no context, back in 2020 and 2021, the then Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, advised the Governor-General to appoint Morrison to administer a number of other government departments, but did not tell the relevant minister, department, parliament, or the public. He therefore secretly held power to exercise the statutory powers that had been conferred upon those ministers. This was only discovered after Morrison left office, resulting in a huge controversy which tarnished Morrison's reputation. In this video, I'll explain what happened by reference to the constitutional and administrative rules, and at the end, I'll also explain how this has since been fixed. While the public was rightly outraged about what occurred, this was partly due to a lack of understanding of the existing rules and practices. So in this video, I'll try to untangle that for you. But don't worry, you will still probably find yourself justifiably angry at the end of the video, but better informed in directing your anger at the right issues and the right people. Most people seem to believe that Morrison had appointed himself as Minister for Health or Minister for Finance, and that instead of these ministerial appointments happening in the ordinary way with a public ceremony and the swearing of oaths, there was some kind of collusion with the Governor-General to do it all secretly. Now that's not quite right. To understand what really happened, we have to go back to the Constitution. There are two relevant sections. Section 65 says that ministers of state shall hold such offices as the Governor-General directs. Section 64 provides that the Governor-General may appoint officers to administer such departments of state of the Commonwealth as the Governor-General in Council may establish. A distinction has been drawn between a minister's office, so the office of Prime Minister or Minister for Health or the Attorney-General, and the appointment of a minister to administer one or more departments. Yes, when a minister is appointed to an office, such as Minister for Defence, there is a public ceremony and an oath is taken, although it's not actually required by the Constitution, as I've explained in previous videos. The appointment is also publicly recorded in the Government Gazette, which is now online and accessible through the Federal Register of Legislation. That minister will usually simultaneously be appointed to administer the related department. So the Minister for Defence will be appointed to administer the Department of Defence. But on a later occasion, an existing minister may be appointed to administer an additional department. Now this might be because his or her portfolio responsibilities require the administration of some aspects of legislation ordinarily administered by another minister and department. For example, the Minister for Sport may have responsibilities that extend into the area of health. Or it may be so that he or she can substitute for another minister when they are away. So, for example, the Deputy Prime Minister will often be appointed to administer the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, making it easy to do so when the Prime Minister is away. These matters were dealt with as administrative paperwork by the Governor-General. There's no formal meeting, there's no ceremony, and there's no oath-taking when that kind of appointment is made. Appointments to administer departments were treated as internal administration and were almost always not gazetted or otherwise formally notified. This was not unique to the Morrison government or to the secret ministry saga. It was actually standard practice, albeit with the occasional aberration. What was completely out of order, however, was the fact that in all but one case, the minister who held the primary responsibility of administering the relevant department was not told, nor was the relevant public service department, nor the cabinet, nor the parliament. It's this secrecy and the lack of responsibility, transparency and accountability which is the legitimate ground for concern. Public servants could not know who they needed to brief and keep informed about particular departmental issues and decision-making, and Parliament could not call that minister to account and question them on those matters. Now, the first step in this particular saga at least did have some justification. On the 14th of March 2020, when the COVID pandemic started raging, Scott Morrison advised the Governor-General, David Hurley, to appoint Morrison to administer the Department of Health during the pandemic. It was explained to the Governor-General that the severity of the pandemic crisis was such that it was necessary to prepare for all eventualities, including the risk that the Minister for Health, Greg Hunt, might become unavailable to exercise his significant powers as Health Minister. Morrison advised that it would be appropriate for another senior minister to be able to exercise those powers in an emergency. He recommended that he, therefore, be authorised to administer the Department of Health. Greg Hunt knew and approved of this action as a reasonable backup plan. I should explain at this point that in 2000, the system of ministerial appointments did change so that a single department could be administered by a senior minister along with more junior ministers and assistant ministers. See my earlier video about parliamentary secretaries where I go through that in more detail. In practice, if Hunt had become ill, his functions could have been exercised by junior ministers who were already authorised to administer the department. Morrison's argument, however, was that during a pandemic, given the seriousness of the issues and the extreme scope of the health minister's powers, a more senior minister should be able to fill in. While that argument seemed reasonable, there were already provisions in sections 19 and 34, capitals AAB of the Acts Interpretation Act 1901, which allowed acting ministers to be appointed. So Morrison's appointment was hardly necessary. As the Bell inquiry found, Morrison could have been authorised to act as Minister for Health within a matter of minutes if the Health Minister had become incapacitated. And if this reasoning were to be taken seriously, then the same issue would arise in relation to the Prime Minister or other senior ministers becoming ill and needing a senior minister to replace them. Hence, if one was being logical, a panel of senior ministers ought to have been appointed to be able to step in when required. But as you've probably guessed by now, this justification does not seem to have been the real reason for the appointment. This became apparent when the Prime Minister later advised the Governor-General to appoint him to administer the Department of Finance on the 30th of March 2020, the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources on the 15th of April 2021, and the Departments of the Treasury and Home Affairs on the 5th of May 2021. In these cases, the senior ministers in those portfolios were unaware of the appointments, as were the public service heads of the various departments. The Prime Minister was effectively lurking in the shadows, able to swoop in and exercise the powers of those ministers if and when he chose. Interestingly, it seems he only used the power once, when he overrode his Resources Minister in relation to a decision regarding an offshore gas project. It had nothing at all to do with the pandemic or exercising a power when a senior minister was sick or unavailable. It was about overriding a minister and seizing his powers over a politically sensitive issue. While the Prime Minister's actions in overriding his Resources Minister were known publicly at the time, the media did not inquire into how the Prime Minister had acquired the power to act. They did not notice that there was something fishy going on. Now, I point that out because it's relevant to the pile-on that hit the Governor-General. It was argued that either the Governor-General colluded with the Prime Minister by failing to gazette or publicise these appointments, or that he turned a blind eye to Morrison's secrecy. But these arguments were based upon a lack of knowledge of the system as it operated. First, as I explained earlier, these types of appointments were administrative paperwork. There was no oath or ceremony involved, and they were not customarily gazetted. The Governor-General just signed the documents as advised in writing by the Prime Minister and sent them back to the Prime Minister's department. As the Bell inquiry found, it was not the practice of the Governor-General's office to gazette or notify appointments of existing ministers to administer other departments when they were made on the papers. It was the department's responsibility to take any necessary steps to alert the affected departments and to gazette appointments when that was appropriate. It failed to do so, but it claimed that it was a matter for the Prime Minister's office. The Governor-General was attacked for not mentioning these appointments in his daily program. But the Governor-General's program is just a list of events and ceremonies and meetings that are held. It has never been a record of the paperwork of the Governor-General, which he'd signed. His official secretary pointed out in an Estimates Committee hearing that there had been 38 occasions in the previous 10 years under 3 different Governors-General where ministers had been appointed to administer departments, and none of them had ever been recorded in the Governor-General's program. But surely, people argued, the Governor-General should have realised that these appointments were being kept secret because he didn't see them mentioned in the media. But of course, the media never writes a story saying that such and such a minister has been appointed to administer a different department, because it's not a story. I doubt whether on any of the other 37 occasions anyone had ever written a story in the media about it. It only became a matter of interest once the secrecy had been revealed. If it had all been done publicly with ministerial consultation and been put in the Gazette, no one would have given 2 hoots about it. Should the Governor-General have suspected that the Prime Minister was secretly hiding his appointments from his colleagues and the public service departments, and should he have hauled him in to interrogate him about it? Well, no one would have imagined that such a bizarre thing would ever occur until it actually did. The Governor-General wasn't told, "Shh, this is a secret that I'm keeping from Cabinet and the public service and the Parliament." But what if someone had tipped the Governor-General off? What could he have done? Ultimately, the Governor-General would still have been obliged to act upon the Prime Minister's advice. No reserve powers arise here. But he could have sought legal advice from the government about the legality of the action, or sought to persuade the Prime Minister to seek the approval of his Cabinet, or otherwise expressed his concern. I'll just give you one example of this. Sir Paul Hasluck, as Governor-General, was privately warned by the Defence Minister, Malcolm Fraser, back in 1970, that the Prime Minister, John Gorton, was about to come and see him to seek an urgent Executive Council meeting to approve the sending of Australian troops to Papua New Guinea to deal with unrest, and that this neither had the approval of the Defence Minister nor the Army, and moreover it had not been considered by Cabinet. No doubt the Governor-General would not ordinarily have realised that he was being bounced into action that did not have Cabinet or Defence support, and probably would have signed the Executive Council minute. But having been forewarned, Hasluck was able to persuade Prime Minister Gorton that it was in his political interests to have the support of Cabinet in case something went wrong and there was a subsequent inquiry into the action. Gorton then went back and did consult his Cabinet. After a further report on the circumstances, the decision was made not to proceed with sending the troops. It was done without Hasluck rejecting any advice. Instead, he had exercised his ability to persuade. Similarly, the Governor-General could have sought to counsel Morrison to seek the support of his Cabinet and keep the public service and the Parliament informed, but he would first have had to know that Morrison was keeping these matters from his ministers and public servants, which he didn't. At least that's what he told me. So what's happened since then? For those interested, there was an opinion by the Commonwealth Solicitor General on the 22nd of August 2022, which found that while the appointments were legally valid, Morrison's actions fundamentally undermined the principle of responsible government because Morrison was not being responsible to Parliament and through Parliament to the electors for the departments that he had been appointed to administer. An inquiry was then held by Virginia Bell, which examined what had happened, you can read that online, and which recommended changes to prevent such actions occurring in the future. These changes have now been implemented. The Ministers of State Act 1952 was amended by the insertion of sections 5, 6 and 6A, which require the official secretary to the Governor-General to issue a notifiable instrument recording when an executive councillor has been sworn in or when a minister is appointed to administer a department under section 64 of the Constitution, or a minister is appointed to hold a particular office under section 65 of the Constitution. These must all now be published on the Federal Register of Legislation. The Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet's website now also contains a vast deal of information under the Government Administration tab, if you go looking for it, which sets out ministry lists, lists of which ministers can administer departments and a guide to their particular responsibilities, copies of ministerial appointments and their revocation, information about acting ministerial arrangements, and copies of the administrative arrangements orders. Much of this information was really hard to find in the past, and I know because I'm one of the few people who ever looked for it, so this is a great improvement. Ironically, therefore, Morrison's absurd and objectionable secrecy has resulted in a vast improvement to transparency about the machinery of government. But should he get a medal for that? Now, I'll leave that to others to decide, but please do not flood the comments section for this video with abusive comments. You can just keep them in your head where they belong. Thank you once again for watching the Constitutional Clarion. I hope this helps you to get a better understanding of this rather bizarre footnote in Australian political history. And as always, I look forward to seeing you again next time. Goodbye.